Have you ever noticed how the most influential people rarely have to raise their voice? While others shout commands and push their agenda, true masters of persuasion operate in whispers. Welcome to Machiavelli's whisper technique, where you'll discover why the loudest voice in the room is rarely the most powerful. Think about it. The ideas that truly stick with you aren't the ones forced upon you. They're the thoughts you believe came from your own mind. This is no accident. Throughout history, from Renaissance politics to modern boardrooms, those who understand the art of subtle influence have always outmaneuvered those relying on brute authority. What I'm about to share isn't just theory. These are battle-tested methods that have toppled regimes, built empires, and, yes, can transform how you navigate every relationship in your life. While others fight for control through volume and force, you'll learn to plant seeds of thought that others nurture as their own. The truth is, demanding compliance creates resistance, but guiding someone to your conclusion in a way that feels like their own discovery, that creates lasting change. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how to become the quiet architect of decisions rather than the obvious influencer. So, if you're tired of being ignored despite speaking loudly, or if you're curious about the subtle mechanics of true persuasion, stay with me. The power you're seeking doesn't require you to speak over others. It requires you to speak through them. Number 1. The echo chamber method. Have you ever tried to convince someone of something important to you, only to watch them instantly shut down? Your brilliant idea dies before it even has a chance to breathe. What if I told you there's a way around this frustrating barrier, a method so effective that the person you're trying to influence will actually fight to defend your idea as if it were their own? Think about the last time you instantly rejected someone's advice. Was it because the idea was bad, or was it because it came from outside your existing framework of beliefs? Our minds naturally resist external influence. It's a defense mechanism as old as humanity itself. But what happens when an idea doesn't feel external at all? This resistance creates an invisible wall around people's minds. You can hammer against this wall with facts, logic, and passionate arguments, but you'll only strengthen their resistance. Or you can simply find the door that's already open. That door is what I call their existing belief system. Every person carries a unique mental map of reality. This map contains their values, experiences, and deeply held convictions. When a new idea conflicts with this map, the mind automatically rejects it to maintain internal consistency. But when an idea seems to confirm what they already believe, that's when the magic happens. Here's where we arrive at technique number 1 of 5 in Machiavelli's whisper arsenal, the echo chamber method. Instead of presenting your ideas directly, you position them as echoes of thoughts your target already holds. By connecting your suggestion to their existing beliefs, you create what psychologists call a resonance effect, where they perceive your idea as an extension of their own thinking. Let me show you exactly how this works. First, you need to become an explorer of their mental landscape. Listen carefully to the language they use, the values they express, and the beliefs they hold sacred. When you understand what really matters to them, you'll discover countless bridges to your own objectives. Next, reframe your idea using their vocabulary and value system. If they pride themselves on being innovative, position your suggestion as the cutting-edge approach. If they value tradition, frame your idea as a return to proven principles. The actual content of your suggestion might remain largely the same, but the packaging makes all the difference. The most powerful application of this technique involves asking questions that lead them to voice opinions adjacent to your goal. When they verbalize beliefs that neighbor your intended destination, you can simply connect the dots. That's interesting. It sounds like what you're saying is similar to, and then introduce your idea as a natural extension of their expressed view. What makes this approach so effective is that it bypasses their natural resistance to external influence. They feel like they've discovered something themselves rather than being led to it. The seed you planted flourishes because they believe it sprouted from their own mental soil. Remember, true influence isn't about overpowering someone's will, it's about aligning with the currents of thought that already exist within them. By mastering the echo chamber method, you'll never again waste energy pushing against closed minds. Instead, you'll channel your ideas through pathways that already welcome them. Number 2, the delayed revelation strategy. Let me ask you something that might sound strange. What's more powerful? Giving someone a complete answer or letting them figure out the final piece themselves? Most people intuitively try to persuade by building airtight cases, covering every angle and answering every possible objection. But what if that approach is actually working against you? Our brains are prediction machines. From the moment we're born, we're constantly trying to complete patterns and anticipate what comes next. When something is unfinished, it creates a kind of mental tension, an itch that demands to be scratched. This phenomenon is so powerful that psychologists have given it a name, the Zeigarnik effect, which states that people remember uncompleted tasks better than completed ones. Think about the last TV show that kept you watching episode after episode. What kept you engaged wasn't the answers, it was the questions, the cliffhangers, the mysteries that your brain couldn't help but try to solve. This same principle works in everyday influence, but most people never realize its potential. When someone hands you a complete solution, your natural response is to evaluate it critically, looking for flaws. But when someone provides most of a solution while strategically leaving gaps, something fascinating happens. Your brain shifts from critic to collaborator. Instead of looking for what's wrong, you start filling in what's missing. This brings us to our second technique out of 5 in the Machiavelli whisper arsenal, the delayed revelation strategy. The delayed revelation strategy involves planting incomplete information that creates a natural curiosity gap in someone's mind. When humans encounter incomplete patterns, our brains instinctively work to complete them. By strategically withholding key elements of your suggestion, you force others to actively participate in forming the conclusion you want them to reach. Here's how to implement this technique effectively. First, identify the specific conclusion you want someone to reach. Next, work backward to determine what information would naturally lead to that conclusion. Then, present most of that information in a seemingly neutral way, but deliberately leave out the final connecting pieces. For example, rather than telling a colleague, "We should hire candidate A," you might share several impressive facts about candidate A's background, mention a problem your team has been facing, and then simply ask, "What do you think?" The mental dots are there, waiting to be connected, and your colleague will likely make the connection themselves. The moment they verbalize the conclusion you wanted all along, something remarkable happens. Because they arrived at the idea themselves, they instantly take ownership of it. What would have been your suggestion to evaluate becomes their insight to champion. What makes this approach so powerful is that people rarely question the paths their own minds take. When they connect the dots themselves, they not only take ownership of the resulting idea, but will actively defend it as their own. They become invested in its success because it reflects on their own insight and judgment. The key is subtlety. If they suspect you're manipulating the information to lead them to a predetermined conclusion, the strategy backfires. The art lies in presenting information that feels complete enough to be trustworthy, but incomplete enough to activate their own mental processes. By mastering the delayed revelation strategy, you'll transform from someone pushing ideas to someone who creates the conditions where others discover exactly what you wanted them to think, but on their own terms, in their own words, and with their own conviction. Number 3. The invisible bridge technique. Have you ever wondered why some decisions feel completely free, yet somehow everyone ends up making the same choice? The most skilled persuaders understand something crucial that most people miss. The environment around a decision often matters more than the arguments for the decision itself. Think about walking through a shopping mall. Every element, from the layout of the stores to the music playing in the background, is carefully engineered to guide your behavior. You still feel like you're making independent choices, but the architecture of options has already done much of the work. This same principle applies to persuasion in everyday life, yet most people focus entirely on making their case rather than shaping the decision environment. Consider how differently we behave in a library versus at a sports event. The environment itself communicates what actions are appropriate without anyone having to say a word. What if you could create similar invisible guidelines around the specific decisions you want others to make? Most attempts at influence fail because they trigger resistance. The moment someone feels pushed toward a conclusion, psychological reactance kicks in. The natural human tendency to protect our sense of freedom by resisting perceived attempts to constrain it. But what if, instead of pushing someone across a bridge, you could simply remove all other bridges? This brings us to our third technique of the 5 in Machiavelli's whisper arsenal, the invisible bridge technique. The invisible bridge technique involves creating contextual environments where only one logical path forward exists, the one you want taken. Rather than pushing someone across a bridge, you remove all other bridges. This makes your desired outcome feel like the natural, inevitable choice, rather than something imposed externally. Here's how to implement this approach. First, identify all possible options that might compete with your preferred outcome. Next, subtly highlight the flaws or obstacles associated with these alternatives, not through direct criticism, but by asking thoughtful questions that expose their limitations. Finally, position your preferred option as the path of least resistance, the choice that elegantly avoids all the problems associated with the alternatives. For example, if you want your team to adopt a new project management approach, don't begin by advocating for it directly. Instead, create a discussion about the current challenges everyone is facing. Guide the conversation to establish criteria for an ideal solution. When you eventually introduce your preferred approach, it appears as the natural answer to the collective problems, the only bridge left standing. The true elegance of this technique lies in its invisibility. The key is ensuring they never see your hand in limiting their options. People must believe they've surveyed the full landscape of possibilities and made an independent choice. The moment they suspect manipulation, trust evaporates. What makes this approach so powerful is that it preserves the other person's sense of autonomy while nevertheless guiding them to your desired outcome. They don't feel pushed because there's no pushing involved, just a carefully constructed environment that makes one path clearly superior to all others. By mastering the invisible bridge technique, you'll stop wasting energy trying to convince people to take your path. Instead, you'll become skilled at quietly removing the alternative paths, ensuring that the route you prefer becomes the one they naturally choose to walk. Number 4. The reversed authority principle. Have you ever noticed how quickly people tune out when someone starts speaking as an expert? There's that glazed look in their eyes, that subtle shift in posture, signs that, while they might be hearing your words, they're no longer truly listening. What if I told you that the fastest way to lose influence is actually to claim authority in the first place? We live in an age of information overload, where everyone claims to be an expert on something. As a result, people have developed highly sensitive filters against being lectured. The moment you position yourself as the authority delivering wisdom from on high, you activate these filters. Your ideas, no matter how brilliant, get categorized as someone else's opinion, rather than valuable insight. Consider how differently you process information when you're being told what to think versus when you're figuring something out for yourself. When you solve a problem on your own, there's a sense of ownership and commitment that simply doesn't exist when someone hands you the answer. This psychological principle is at the heart of all lasting persuasion. Most people try to influence others by establishing their credentials and then dispensing their wisdom. But what if this approach is precisely backward? What if true influence comes not from providing answers, but from asking the right questions? This brings us to technique number 4 of 5 in the Machiavelli whisper arsenal, the reversed authority principle. The reversed authority principle involves deliberately understating your knowledge and asking thoughtful questions that lead others to your desired conclusion. When someone articulates an idea in their own words as a response to your question, they form significantly stronger commitment to that position than if you had simply told them what to think. Here's how to implement this powerful technique. First, you must genuinely set aside your ego and the desire to be recognized as knowledgeable. This is harder than it sounds, but absolutely essential. Next, develop questions that guide without obviously leading, questions that help others examine assumptions they usually take for granted. For example, rather than telling a friend that investment is too risky, you might ask, what would happen if the market shifts like it did in 2008? Or, how would this investment perform if interest rates change? These questions invite them to reach their own conclusions about risk without you having to directly challenge their judgment. The key is authenticity. These questions must come from a place of genuine curiosity rather than manipulative intent. People have remarkable radar for detecting when questions are merely disguised statements. The true art lies in helping others think more deeply about matters they might otherwise overlook. What makes this approach so powerful is how it transforms the dynamic from persuasion to discovery. Instead of creating resistance, you create partnership. The person you're influencing never feels like they're being pushed into a position. Instead, they experience the pleasure of insight, of reaching important conclusions through their own reasoning. When someone articulates an idea in their own words, something remarkable happens in their brain. They become invested in that idea in a way that simply doesn't occur when they're merely agreeing with someone else's point. This is why the most powerful form of influence often looks like helping others influence themselves. By mastering the reversed authority principle, you'll stop undermining your own persuasiveness by triggering resistance. Instead, you'll become skilled at guiding others through a process of discovery that leads precisely where you wanted to go, but with their full ownership and commitment. Number 5. The shadow validation framework. Have you ever wondered why we're more likely to try a restaurant when multiple friends recommend it independently? There's something uniquely powerful about hearing the same message from different sources, a phenomenon that operates at the very foundation of how we determine what's true. Yet most people attempting to influence others completely overlook this psychological principle. We live in a world of competing narratives where trust is increasingly difficult to establish. When a single source makes a claim, our natural skepticism activates. But when multiple sources that seem unconnected to each other point toward the same conclusion, something powerful happens. Our brains recognize a pattern that suggests objective truth rather than individual opinion. Think about the last time you made an important decision. Did you look for consensus? Did hearing similar advice from separate sources strengthen your confidence? This natural human tendency to trust convergent information is wired into our decision-making process, yet rarely leveraged strategically in everyday influence. Most persuasion attempts fail because they come from a single obvious source: you. No matter how logical your argument or how compelling your evidence, the fact that it all comes from one direction creates a natural resistance. But what if you could orchestrate a symphony of validation from seemingly unconnected sources. This brings us to our fifth and final technique in the Machiavelli whisper arsenal, the shadow validation framework. The shadow validation framework involves creating third-party validation for your ideas through seemingly unconnected sources. When multiple inputs from different directions all point to the same conclusion, humans perceive this as objective truth rather than orchestrated influence. Here's how to implement this sophisticated approach. First, identify the specific belief or action you want someone to adopt. Next, map out the various sources of influence in their life: friends, colleagues, media outlets, respected authorities. Then, find ways to expose them to supporting messages from these diverse channels. For example, if you want to convince a colleague to support a new initiative, you might mention relevant industry trends in a casual conversation. Email an article from a respected publication that happens to support similar approaches, and ensure they overhear a conversation where others express enthusiasm for comparable ideas. None of these touch points explicitly push your agenda, yet together they create a powerful convergence. The key is patience and subtlety. This technique requires time to establish multiple validation points. Each individual exposure should feel natural and coincidental. The moment someone detects coordination behind these apparently independent inputs, the effect collapses. What makes this approach so powerful is how it works with our natural information processing. When we encounter the same basic idea from multiple sources, our brains efficiently categorize it as likely true rather than continuously reevaluating it. This creates nearly unshakable conviction in others that they've arrived at the right conclusion independently. This technique operates in the shadows of awareness. People rarely recognize how their perception of truth is shaped by repeated exposure across contexts. They simply know what feels true based on the patterns they've observed, patterns you've carefully helped create. By mastering the shadow validation framework, you'll stop battling uphill against natural skepticism. Instead, you'll orchestrate an environment where the conclusion you desire emerges organically as the obvious truth, supported not by your authority alone, but by the apparent consensus of multiple trusted sources. As we reach the end of our journey through Machiavelli's whisper technique, remember that true influence has always operated through subtle channels rather than brute force. The 5 methods we've explored, the echo chamber method, the delayed revelation strategy, the invisible bridge technique, the reversed authority principle, and the shadow validation framework, all share a common thread. They respect the autonomy of others while guiding them toward your desired outcome. These techniques aren't about manipulation, but mastery. Mastery of human psychology and social dynamics. The difference between the person who shouts commands and gets resistance versus the person who whispers suggestions and creates movements isn't just volume, it's understanding. When you operate with this deeper understanding, you no longer need to push against natural human resistance. Instead, you align yourself with the currents of thought and motivation that already exist. Remember, the most powerful influence is the kind that's never recognized as influence at all. Practice these techniques with integrity, and you'll find yourself becoming not just more persuasive, but more valuable in every relationship and situation. The quietest voice often carries the furthest, especially when it speaks through others. The next video the algorithm chose for you isn't random. It's your next tactical upgrade. Click it now and continue your silent ascent.